Good evening, everyone. So, happy New Year to all of you, and I wish 2013 will bring robust and happiness. This is our second public lecture in this very faculty, and we have tonight the pleasure and the honor to welcome Professor Xiang Lanxin. So, Professor Xiang.
Thank you.
Yes, but this is explained because this is the fourth year that Professor Xiang Lanxin comes to USG as a visiting professor. As you have seen on his bio note, Professor Xiang is international leading expert on China issues, China-US and China-EU relations. He is a graduate from Fudan University and holds a PhD degree from Johns Hopkins University. He's a regular columnist for Global Times and for the South China Morning Post. I know that some of us do follow his columns on a regular basis. Lanxin has also authored 3 books in English and 4 in Chinese that have been well acclaimed by the scholarly community, and has been recently working on a long-term project that should be coming to an end by next year. So that's for next year. And tonight, Professor Xiang is going to discuss with us his insights about the new leadership that has been appointed in Beijing last November. So let's give Professor Xiang another round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be back USJ again. The topic I'm going to deal with today is the new leadership and the challenges. I think first of all, I think this leadership in Beijing today is a very unique one. Now, you can argue every leadership is unique, but this particular generation of leaders is, I would say, truly unique because there is no comparison with the previous generation nor with the future generation. This is a unique generation who was born mostly in the 50s. And that means they have nothing to do with revolution. And also, I think what's important about this 1950s generation, meaning people in their mid-50s and perhaps reaching 60s, in this generation, what's interesting is they have been through the most tumultuous events in People's Republic history, more than any other generation. When you think about I'm not talking about the first and second generation, which in Chinese terminology means the Mao generation. Deng Xiaoping called himself second generation. Actually, he belonged to the first generation. But I'm talking about the post-revolutionary generation's leadership. You have a Jiang Zemin, Jiang Zemin generation who is only marginally involved in the last stage of revolution, and who this generation also lucky enough to be able to finish their college education shortly before the revolution, the success of the revolution, 1949, and they were the mostly technocrats who were utilized immediately by the new leadership after 1949, and they even got opportunity to study in some foreign countries. Those days, of course, mostly Soviet bloc countries. Then you have a Hu Jintao generation who is the most limited in their experience and outlook, because this is a generation who are so lucky they've just finished all their education before the Cultural Revolution, and they already got a steady job by that time. So they haven't been through all these troubles the 50s generation who went through. Now, that's a generation who've been through the reform camps, labor camps, who've been through the many events that reflecting the problems and ups and downs of the PRC history. As we can see from Mr. Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang's the number 1, number 2, their personal experience is very clear. Xi Jinping went to countryside at the age of 16, and Li Keqiang's there at age of 18. Xi Jinping spent 6 years in the remote village, and Li Keqiang about 4. myself also, 4 years. We've been through this. We're the same generation in the sense, I think the difference about this generation and the previous generation is that they have seen the worst part of the country. They saw the bottom, they experienced the bottom of the society. They understood, in my view, they understood the China's problems much more intuitively than the other generations before and after. Okay. They also, lucky enough, they were able to participate at the early stage of the reform. And their career rises steadily through the up and downs of the last 30 years of Chinese reform as well. So this is a generation, I think, that had the most of the insights about Chinese history and politics. And this is a generation who had a sense of historic mission, and if they believe that Chinese system needs a serious repair or rescue, this is the generation, I think, they would not drag their feet. They would be more resolute in their decisions. Now, here I think it's my generalization of this particular generation of PRC history. They have been through the tough life, and their outlook is also very tough, but they're not necessarily unrealistic, and they're not necessarily extreme nationalistic, because they realize that China's international environment is crucially important the last 30 years. That is a peaceful opportunity. It's a peaceful environment. It's a historic and strategic opportunity for China to maintain this current international environment. That environment is crucially important for Chinese economic takeoff and for the future sustained economic growth. So I don't think they will be easily pursue a nationalistic policy to squander what this peaceful environment we have earned so far. Now, if you look at modern Chinese history, this is a rare historic period of peace in China, both domestically and internationally. Yeah. Now, what are the challenges then for this new generation? The first major challenge is how to repair the internal system. Our system today, in the People's Republic system, is badly damaged, despite the fact that the Communist Party has been responsible for a rapid economic growth the last 30 years. But the issue here is that at the same time, with the economic growth, at the same time, the official corruption also grow. So we have a parallel development in China. Now, this is not something we can take lightly, because the Chinese population are still very much in the traditional way of thinking about politics. Chinese thinking about politics throughout history is not a procedure-based way of thinking, meaning if you have a system arrangement, such as Western people would prefer, a spatial concept politics, such as Montesquieu's advice, so-called the divisions of power. You see, that's very much a space-based concept. But in the Confucian China or traditional China, politics always relate to virtue, relate to moral standard. It is the decline or decay of the Communist Party elite's moral standard that now has become the number one problem. That really is the number one threat to the system itself. Yeah. This is not something they can deal with easily, because the problem has been accumulated for more than 30 years, starting with Mr. Deng Xiaoping's rather misguided call for letting some people get rich first. Now, the original argument of Mr. Deng Xiaoping is that if you allow some people get rich first, other people will follow their examples. That means create a market system to let people see how some people are very competitive because they play the right game in the market system. But the reality is, of course, the people who become overnight millionaires or billionaires are mostly related to political power rather than through the enterprising activities or entrepreneurial activities. This has been a problem, I think, caused by the one-party monopoly, not only of political power, but also monopoly of national resources. Okay. So it's very difficult now, after accumulating for more than 30 years, to deal with overnight. But the good news is that I think the Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang leadership now officially recognize this is the number one problem for China. That is, this is the problem that's going to undermine fundamentally the Communist Party's political legitimacy. Now, if you follow opinion polls in China, we have a lot of opinion polls, despite the argument we don't have freedom of speech and so on, but we do have a lot of opinion polls now. One of the opinion polls was this May, last May, conducted by a Beijing newspaper, Global Times. And the question is a simple one. Do you think China is close to a revolution? Now, that's a very daring kind of opinion poll, obviously. The answer is, well, more than 50% answer is yes. Yeah. Global Times is smart enough. They did not publish in Chinese version. They put it in, they put it in the English website, which was captured by French newspaper La Libération. So the Libération actually make it a big news, saying, look, it's the most Chinese thing. But then in the West, people don't understand, saying, well, 8%, 9% growth, if it dropped to 7%, why it caused a revolution? They fail to understand it's not so much the GDP growth figure that matters for parties' legitimacy. GDP growth has never been part of the Chinese traditional culture. It's something entirely new. It's a new concept. It is the quality of growth. It is the per capita income that matters. Okay. Confucianism, as you know, always emphasizes on equality. As Confucius says, rulers do not worry about people poor, they worry about people unequal. When revolution starts, when people feel they are unequal. Now, this is how the official corruption did the damage, fundamental damage to the one-party system, is because it created a huge income gap. According to the international data on what's called the Gini coefficient, which is the internationally recognized index to measure the income gap and its relation to social stabilities. As you can see, the Chinese last year, Mr. Bourchier, before his downfall, Mr. Bourchier claimed publicly, he said we are approaching 0.5. Now the Gini coefficient is from 0 to 1. So 0.5 is very dangerous. 0.4.5 is already entering the red zone, danger zone for social instability, social unrest. Mr. Bourchier said we are at a level of 0.5. Now that announcement has become one of his accusations. Of course, he should not publicly say so because it's supposed to be secret. Last month, another official figure, which is published everywhere in Chinese press. Now we are reaching 0.61. So this is not surprising. We're talking about some kind of pre-revolutionary conditions are brewing now. It's a serious situation today. Yeah. Now, what's interesting about the leadership now, they are taking very, very seriously. I think this is new generation leadership. I think I'm very happy to see. after the 18th Party Congress, as you can see, the leadership, Mr. Xi Jinping and the others, seem to have been obsessed with reading history. That's interesting phenomena. Mr. Wang Qishan, one of the leaders, top 7, who was economic czar of China until last year, now was put in a position as anti-corruption czar. Okay. Upon assuming his job, the first thing he did is recommend people, leaders, including Politburo members and also Chinese intellectuals, to read a rather obscure French book by Alexei de Tocqueville. Now, Alexei de Tocqueville is famous for his writing on American Democracy, which is a very famous, world-famous best-selling books. But this is a book, it's not well known. It's called The Old Regime and the Revolution. Mr. Wang Qishan publicly recommend people reading that book. The reason is very simple. They recognize there is a pre-revolutionary condition. The paradox of Mr. de Tocqueville's book, which published in 1856, long time ago, is to say, usually revolution does not necessarily take place when people are in dire positions, poorest situation, where people cannot live on subsistence level anymore. No, not necessarily. Most revolution in history took place during a kind of dramatic improvement of social conditions during a very dramatic reform period. If you don't handle the balance within the society very well, a revolution could be triggered at any moment, any time. Now, especially in China today, as I said, the Gini coefficient is so high, one of the highest top 10 in the world. So it's, I think the leaders, people like Mr. Wang Qishan, grasp the problem. He realized we have to deal with this problem. So anti-corruption is now considered number 1 priority. Now, how they can do it, we have a lot of debates. Myself also participate in these debates. There are many arguments about what's the best way of doing this. The whole idea, of course, is how you're going to do this without destroying the entire system, right? Create a real revolution. This is what Alexei de Tocqueville's book is talking about. Now, so this is, I think, is one of the really most difficult challenge for the leadership, how to rescue parties' legitimacy. The second point, I think, we can discuss even more if you want later on. The second point is economic transformation. Now, here, I think, in my view, the task is much less a problem. The idea is to transform Chinese economy from a pattern of export-dependent economy into a domestic-driven economy or domestic consumption-driven economy. That transformation, that idea is much less a problem for the leadership to carry on as long as the social stability can be maintained. Again, we're talking about social stability here because we have, according to many studies, probably we have 150,000 social unrest every year now, if you count the whole nation. So it's a lot. Okay. The way they're trying to do this transformation of reduce dependency on foreign trade and foreign direct investment is to create, first of all, a very efficient welfare system. There is talk, I think they are going to pursue a national healthcare system. Now, if that work out, it will be the largest in the world. Okay. That's a universal coverage. If they go into the direction being a universal coverage of healthcare, that will be the largest in the world. The other thing they're trying to do is to create a more efficient retirement system. At the same time, the priority now is given to an idea what the Xi Jinping called urbanization project. That will be the next 5 years. Okay. here, urbanization does not mean people are encouraged to go to big cities. Beijing, Shanghai, that's not the case. They are discouraged coming to this huge metropolis, but rather the idea of urbanization is to create more and more small satellite cities around big cities, especially inland area, okay, for the purpose of reducing rural residents. Therefore, at the same time, reducing dramatically the income gap. Here is the structural gap between countryside and the urban areas. That has been a problem for China for many, many years since the reform, because the rural income is far behind the urban income as far as the speed of growth is concerned. And also between inland and the coastal area. So other issues will follow if urbanization plan works, such as environment protection and now environmental issues. I know it's becoming very serious. The last couple of days you can see, but I think the Chinese government is now giving priority to this. It will take a long time. Again, it has been accumulated for so long, the problem, and they're going to take it very seriously. And my understanding is the Ministry of Environment Protection will be greatly expanded the next couple of months after the March Congress, where the official government will be formed after March. They will give more funding and more portfolio, more power, dealing with China's environmental problems. Okay. Now, the question about the economy here, the one problem they cannot solve or will continue to be in trouble would be the China's excessive holding of U.S. debt. Now, here I think it's our central bank made a mistake anyway, or said the leadership, previous leadership made misjudgment on this issue, and now it's too late for China to get away from this, because most of our 3 trillion or so surpluses, about 2/3, I think, it's in the U.S. assets, which provide the United States not only the finance for their military and other activities, but also provide the United States with the non-stop attempt at diluting value or to reduce the value of the U.S. dollar by quantitative ease. Now we are reaching QE4, and especially when the United States is on the physical cliff. As you can see, we are paying for them. We pick up the tab. It's too late for China to diverse. They should have done before. So this is an issue I think it's very difficult for the leadership to deal with. But as you can see, our central banker already got punished by bypass for this new party central committee, Mr. Zhou Xiaochuan. I will say effectively fired because his behavior in the past. But that's something beyond China's control. They learned the lesson. They will do more in the future to diversify. They did not take euro seriously. Now they regret. So here, I think, and the gold as well. So here, I think it's the economic picture I do not see is we're going to have a major problem this year or next few years. The last point I want to talk about is international relations. Yes, Chinese external relations is in a very, very difficult period, perhaps the most difficult since 1980. There is even talk in China, maybe peaceful environment, or what they call in Chinese language, it's called the strategic opportunity of peace is ending. That means that China has to begin to think about preparation for possible confrontations not only with some neighbor countries over territorial disputes, but more importantly, the problem is between China and the United States. Okay. This, I think, is very clearly reflected by Obama administration's strategy of a pivot to Asia and a variety of ways the United States tried to do to build a kind of anti-China, or at least they say it's not anti-China, but we all know what they mean. Project of several sets of bilateral diplomatic alliance, at the same time reviving quite a few Cold War military alliance. So Americans pursue a very actively a strategy very much similar to what Americans has been pursuing during the Cold War in Asia and the Pacific. It is a strategy of containment, if you allow me to use the Cold War terminology. Okay. And also, the United States had a military revolution the last few years by phasing out some military services and then at the same time stressing other military services. And the most important project here is so-called air-sea battle strategy. Okay. The ASB is something still unfolding. It's not complete project yet. But clearly this is a concept of emphasizing on technical and real battleground coordination between Air Force. Here I also including the space weapon system, not just Air Force, but the Air Force and the Navy. While the land force and the traditional Marines will be phased out. The idea is very clear. I mean, the purpose is very clear here. This is a new military technical revolution. This is idea almost exclusively designed for its pivot to Asia general strategy. Okay. Now, Obama administration has been talking about saying that no, this is not containment. This is what they call rebalancing. No matter what they call rebalancing, what the number one target still is China. So this is one of the reasons I think that the regional security suddenly become very tense. But we do, I believe, have a structural problem in the region as well. Asia Pacific is the only region in the world that never had a serious, never has had a serious collective security system. Almost everywhere in the world, there's some kind of collective security arrangement, but Asia Pacific has never had one. Precisely because Asian Pacific nations for a long time, they are somehow complacent. They don't think they need a region or regional a multilateral security system. It's unnecessary. Also, precisely because economic development is in this region is the most dynamic as compared with other regions of the world. There's always a kind of assumption that people would automatically striving for peace rather than for confrontation. But the reality, of course, proves otherwise. What we see today, Asia Pacific is the largest military market in the world, and Asia Pacific is a place where the most tense arms race, including research and development and many other projects, are taking place. Okay, so it's not the prospect is not nearly as peaceful as people tend to think. Now, did Chinese make mistakes? Yes, I do think so. I think the last few years Chinese also made mistakes. The problem is they mishandled the territorial disputes with other countries. I personally believe that the idea of calling South China Sea China's core interest is one of the colossal mistakes, one of the biggest mistakes, diplomatic mistakes Chinese have made in the last 30 years. Okay, because you don't call some disputed issue a core interest. You can say Tibet is a core interest, Taiwan is a core interest, Xinjiang is a core interest, because that's a direct issue of national sovereignty. And but if you have a disputed territorial issue, if you call it core interest, meaning you don't want to provide any room for negotiations. And also, when you call something core interest, you have to define what periphery is. Of course, the leadership does not have no clue what periphery is. Okay. This, I think, is one of those rather, in my view, stupid mistakes the leadership made the last 10 years, which caused worries, caused concerns of China's neighbors. Besides, of course, the diplomatic attitude of a Chinese top diplomat, including the foreign minister himself. I think many of his behavior, in my view, is not acceptable by international standard. So we have this kind of what Obama administration called excessive assertiveness that was demonstrated, which can be interpreted by outside players as nationalistic. Okay. Well, the good news is that the new leadership, in my view, is not strongly nationalistic, because my understanding, they understand if you want to utilize nationalism for domestic purposes, it's a double-edged weapon. It's always risky doing that. I always prefer to call nationalism a tiger. If you ride a tiger, it can run very fast, but you can never be sure it can reach the destination before it get rid of you yourself. I mean, you've fallen from the tiger's back, get seriously injured. It's very dangerous for any government to rely upon nationalism to pursue a domestic agenda. Now, here I'm not saying only China made mistakes. I certainly think Japanese too. So here I think we are reaching my last point. We can discuss other issues if you want, but the recent Sino-Japanese relationship, I think, is a classic case of misbehavior on both sides and misreading of each other's mind and the miscalculation on both sides. Okay. The purchasing of the island, the Senkaku, or we call Diaoyu Island, in my view, is one of the biggest diplomatic blunt of Japanese politicians ever made, because they knew there is no legal seller to begin with. My view is that it's very much like Margaret Thatcher at the time of negotiating with Deng Xiaoping over Hong Kong. It never touch legal issues. We can always work on these issues with consensus, with tacit understanding. You call it Asian way of doing things, but that's fine. But Margaret Thatcher, before the Hong Kong settlement, the Chinese are not interested in taking over Hong Kong, as you know. Right? They don't want to take over Hong Kong because it's too dangerous politically for Deng Xiaoping even thinking about taking back Hong Kong. There is no plan of taking over Hong Kong. At the time, Margaret Thatcher, British Prime Minister, went to China talking about renewed lease. So when you start talking about lease, Deng Xiaoping's natural reaction to what lease? There is no lease. Because no government in China, I'm not talking about communism, I'm talking about Chiang Kai-shek, we're talking about the previous government, even warlord government, would ever accept the legal concept Hong Kong is under a lease. Because that's a lease was signed 1898 with Manchu government. So it is Japanese, they underestimate this kind of play with the concept purchasing an island. Then you push yourself in a corner saying you have to define it as a sovereign possession. Then you push China in the corner saying there's no way we can accept it. So I think both sides, are not performed very well in this case. So on this particular issue, I'm very pessimistic. I will not be surprised to see some serious confrontation military confrontation take place next few months. Okay, I think I'll stop here. We can welcome the questions. Thank you.
I'm sure, Lanxin, you could continue for hours, and it
Well,
has
if you
been
want.
again a very enjoyable experience to listen to you once
Sure.
again. You know, it's the main challenges are many, tremendous, and very complex, and you help us to decipher within this complexity. I believe that the audience has some questions, so maybe if you want to start. Yes, so maybe we can take 2 questions for you to answer.
Sure.
Yes.
2 different questions. Do you think that the dependency of the United States toward China economically is becoming an aggravating factor in the bilateral relations, or an attenuating factor? And a totally different questions. How do you see the strategic partnership of the United States with India, vis-à-vis China, of course, this equation?
My understanding, you talk about dependency of the U.S. on China. You talk about financial side and the money, basically, right? You said that the U.S.-China economic. Well, you know, unfortunately, as economist Keynes used to say, if I owe my bank 1,000 pound, I'm afraid of my banker. But if I owe my bank 1 billion pound, the banker afraid of me. So this is how the situation is. They owe us so much money, and they are in a better position. We are hostages, basically. I think the Chinese are effectively hostages now. They cannot get out. They cannot even reduce on large scale, and they cannot even talk about, threaten to get out the U.S. debt, because that immediately triggered a depreciation of the dollar value. We lost probably 30%, you know, just overnight. It's to nobody's advantage now. I think this is a misjudgment, in my view, on China's side, without any thinking of diversification. Because you buy anything, you diversify. It's like, you know, buying stock. Stocks, you're supposed to diversify. Why you only hold one currency? So this is a mistake. So I think it's, diplomatically speaking, it's not to our advantage anymore on that issue. Now, the second question, you talk about U.S.-Indian strategic relations. Yes, it is very important, because this is a one dot. Remember, American return to Asia strategy depends on several dots they want to link. Right? And there are some dots they already worked out. So I'm talking about the strategic line vis-a-vis China. Chinese would call C-shape line of encirclement. That's what the Chinese military would call. All the way from Kure Island, Okinawa, Japan, Okinawa, Diaoyu Island, Taiwan, Philippines, crosses the South China Sea, Vietnam, into Indian Ocean. Okay. Now the Americans' diplomatic move is very successful. They are very successful, even working on a couple of dots. They desperately want to link Burma, being one example, the Myanmar. Americans are excessively active there. That's what Obama's first visit after the re-election. It's Myanmar. And the other is India. Yeah, the other is India. Of course, they hope Cambodia, they hope Thailand, but Cambodia, Thailand is much harder to work on, but they are too close to China. So, India is a case America plays very, very important stake there. Okay. Because the question of Indian Ocean access, that's where the Chinese Navy would like to have a presence. But so far, it's not entirely successful. That would be my judgment, because Indians are not willing to automatically jump on American strategic plan. Okay. There is another issue. I think Americans are frustrated with Indians. Americans hope Indians would purchase on large-scale American weapon systems, which Indians need to purchase now. They are very aggressive in buying those weapons, but since the legacy of Indian military since the Cold War is that they are always allied with the Russians, they are used to Russian military weapon system. It's hard for Indians unless you completely revamp your weapon system, including code of operation. Everything you need to change. So they rather prefer to buy more, continue to buy from the Russians than from the United States, even though they're buying some U.S. weapons. So Americans hope Indians purchase more and more. Eventually, they will, what the Pentagon people would call interoperable situation. When if there is a war in the ocean, they will automatically collaborate. Easy to technically.
And
So.
theoretically says no United States, no China. Is
Right.
this sustainable, this position?
Well, it may be sustainable. You see, during the Cold War, non-aligned movement never sustainable. As we all know, India, Yugoslavia, they all tried this, and Indonesia also. But today it's possible. My view is this: United States strategy against China, they cannot rely on ASEAN countries entirely, because ASEAN is itself split in the middle, basically. That's why it's provided a space for a country like Indonesia to play its old game, as they did before with the Bandung Conference, the Sukarno period. So it's possible. And from Chinese point of view, of course, they will be most happy Indonesia to play that role. That will be the most happy situation for them. Yes.
I thought you implied that
Yes.
the three words, the words economics and corruption and government,
Right.
were three words.
Yes.
They're not the same word. Doesn't government determine what is criminality? And government is not about to criminalize itself. So aren't those three words really just one word? And how can you sort out, how can you untangle that grotesque word?
Well, it's always difficult. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't think it's necessarily a problem for China. I mean, this is a universal problem. You think about every state, a big country like Brazil, think about even Russia. How do you deal with Russia? It's basically a mafia country, right? Italy, not to mention, and the United States itself.
Absolutely. First and foremost.
Yeah, the first and foremost, the United States, especially during the 19th century, what they call Mark Twain called the Gilded Age, where you have Tammany Hall politics, you have all these Rockefellers, Morgans, who basically buying votes, buying politicians. It's always difficult to disentangle government, corruption, economy, because they are intimately related. Now, what is unique? This is my my thinking about China here is that the official corruption is widespread in China, but it's not well organized. In other words, I put it this way: it is not legitimately defended as being a way of life. It's a right for the elite who holding political power to have access to windfalls of the economic success, because the official ideology is still, well, first of all, it's we still call ourselves socialism with Chinese characteristics. Now, when you still maintain the concept of socialism, there is no way for the government to justify such a huge income gap. No matter what you try, what methods you try, you cannot justify. Okay, so from the people's point of view, if they see it every day, some people driving Ferrari, some people, don't even have a car. That's something people need to find, the answers. Okay, so the official corruption in China, in other words, has no legal basis, and there is no official sanctions in the past. It is the elite who took opportunities to play within this system. So in that sense, I think it's if the leadership really is determined to deal with this issue seriously, they can find a way to do this. Now, but how you can do it without destroying the party and the state, as I say, we are all debating about it. I myself published a piece maybe last month. My own proposal, I can tell you we have a lot of debates. My own proposal, let's follow the South African approach. That's, of course, I received so many attacks on the website. My preference is the South African approach. That is the Reconciliation Committee. Remember this, it's called the Truth and Reconciliation Committee approach. My proposal is to set up a deadline to force them to submit their, file their assets, and they have to return a large chunk of assets to the state. And after that deadline, forget about it. In the future, of course, we are at the same time going to set up very, very tough. This is what Wang Qishan is doing now. Tough rules, saying if somebody violates again, but we cannot trace back everybody misbehavior, criminal behavior, or because all these corruption behavior always in between law, legal, and illegal. It's always difficult to demarcate the thing. So I prefer this approach, but most Chinese readers don't agree. So I don't know. How we do it, but that's more a very important issue here. It's going to be a tough issue.
I got a little bit more.
Yes.
Going back to those dots, I heard a couple of years ago by Asso,
Yes.
before he became Prime Minister,
Right.
Mr. Fornacier, calling it the arch of freedom and prosperity, which it's like a geographic barrier
Right.
that doesn't allow China to go into the open sea.
Right.
What is the role of Russia? Because it seems that we are always talking about from east to west,
True.
and forgetting the big giant on the north.
Well, yes, China and Russia has the best relationship ever in history. I always joke about this since Catherine the Great. They really enjoy the best time now. The meaning, of course, Russians understand my joke. The meaning is the Chinese and the Russians never trust each other since Catherine the Great. So at this stage, it's really the best. The reason is that they don't have much geostrategic rivalry today. This is, I think, the good news. Secondly, I think China and Russia are complementary with each other in terms of economic structure, even though Russians tend to resent that. When I made a speech at the St. Petersburg Economic Summit some 2 years ago, I used the term compatibility. Russians are not happy to hear. I said the two structure compatible, meaning we are manufacturing industry, they are providing raw materials. Right? So this is Russians are very unhappy. But nevertheless, they are more compatible than other bilateral economic relationship. They have something we need. Two things Russian can sell. If they want to sell, we purchase everything they can sell. One is advanced weapon system, whatever they want to sell. The other is the energy resources. And then China, of course, selling manufacturing products. So I don't see Russia. It's today with China is the most important bilateral relationship, one of the most important bilateral relationship as well, aside from China-EU relations. Now, Xi Jinping, a new leader, where he's going to visit, first country he's going to visit. My guess is, prove if I'm wrong, next couple of months, Russia. That will be my hunch.
Other questions? Maybe I can ask you, when this leadership was appointed in November, the scholarly community of China experts were a bit disappointed and felt that it was a bit more conservative than their expectation from 6 months ago, especially after the fall of Po Xilai. But after listening to you, it seems that you are much more optimistic.
Right.
And so once again, you prove yourself to be against a mainstream kind of feeling.
Well, yes, I never use a typical Western press expression by dividing Chinese leaders in two camps, reformers and conservatives, as if people are conservative are not interested in reforms, or vice versa. Now, I don't think this, this is the way look at this issue. I would say, yes, Mr. Xi Jinping, Wang Qishan, perhaps also Li Keqiang, but less Li Keqiang, and several others, you can characterize as being conservative. Conservative meaning they want to conserve the state and the party system. They would not allow a deviation from this fundamental principle. That is, we're not going to change into a different system. Okay. But at the same time, my argument would be this is a very pragmatic group, and they have experience, life experience, survival instinct. So what they do is they will do whatever is pragmatic they can, practical they can, to repair and rescue the system, or eventually improve the system. So in that sense, political reform is on the agenda. I would not think it's possible that they will not push for a major aspect of political reform. I think they will do. They will, yes.
Okay, that's quite a positive note.
Right.
If there is no other questions, I'd like to invite everyone to join us for some refreshments and to continue the discussion with Professor Xiang. Before that, let's give Professor Xiang a last round of applause.